Hello and welcome to Getting Better All the Time, Metadata Enhancements in the ICPSR Catalog. I'm Megan Chenoweth. I am a Senior Associate Librarian and Metadata Manager at ICPSR. And I'd like to thank my co-authors on this presentation, Mike Shallcross, a Senior Associate Archivist at ICPSR, Jeanette Jackson, Director of Strategic Initiatives here at ICPSR, and Jared Lyle, our Director of Metadata and Preservation at ICPSR. The goal of today's presentation is to give you a preview of some changes coming to ICPSR metadata. We've been working on these changes for years, with the goal of making studies at ICPSR easier to search for and easier to evaluate once you've found something that you're interested in. If you deposit data with ICPSR, or you work with people who do, or you search for ICPSR data, or you help people who do, this session will give you some practical tips for making the most of ICPSR's improved metadata. Let's begin by making sure we're clear on what we mean by metadata. Metadata is structured information that describes, explains, locates, or otherwise makes it easier to retrieve, use, or manage an information resource. There are different types of metadata. For example, technical metadata, which includes things like file formats, administrative metadata, which includes rights and licensing information. But today, what we're focusing on is primarily descriptive metadata. Descriptive metadata supports searching, browsing, and describing the content of information resources in ways that help users understand the resource's content. At ICPSR, examples of descriptive metadata include a data collection's title, principal investigators, summary, subject terms, and funding agencies, among many others. ICPSR is in the process of making several enhancements to our metadata fields, which we're going to go over today. The specific enhancements we're going to talk about are improved metadata consistency across studies, expanded support for persistent identifiers or PIDs, new required metadata fields, expanded use of controlled vocabularies, and enhanced geographic coverage and nationally representative studies. We expect these enhancements to bring a clear benefit to the people who deposit data with ICPSR, as well as to our users who get their research data from ICPSR. For depositors, these enhancements make it easier to describe a data deposit in ways that make their data fair, findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. There are clearer requirements for what information should be shared and how it should be described. For users, these enhancements support better search functionality, more ways to filter and iterate on searches, and overall, better discovery. The changes ICPSR is implementing are informed by metadata standards that are widely used and considered best practices in the broader community of data repositories, libraries, and archives. Building on community standards makes us more efficient and interoperable. The changes strengthen our connections with standards building communities that we are regularly engaged with, like the Data Documentation Initiative and DataCite. And building on community standards makes use more efficient and more interoperable. It enables our metadata to be ingested or connected more easily to other systems, like library or repository catalogs. Why are we making these changes now? These enhancements are one of a number of improvements that ICPSR is making as part of our ongoing software modernization project known as the Research Data Ecosystem, or RDE, which is funded by the U.S. National Science Foundation. The goal of RDE is to modernize the software and systems that we've developed over the course of 60 years of managing, curating, preserving, and sharing research data. With RDE, we're building a set of tools that support really the entire research data lifecycle for social science data, all the way from discovery through curation to long-term preservation. We expect the RDE project to increase the sustainability of ICPSR's platform to help us make sure that we can keep doing what we do best well into the future. Our metadata enhancements are just one of the improvements that we're making under the umbrella of RDE in service of keeping our data fair. There are improvements in the RDE platform that affect how you deposit data with ICPSR, how that data will be accessed, the ways you can explore data to determine if it's suitable for your uses and interests, and finally, new ways of discovering and using data types that are more and more widely used in social science research, like video and geospatial data. Metadata, though, is at the heart of all of our RDE improvements and will continue to be the foundation for keeping our data fair at ICPSR. Our metadata enables discovery, access, interoperability, and reuse across systems, disciplines, and time. You might be wondering when you will see these enhancements for the repositories and data that you use the most. So we'd like to share a timeline for migration to the modernized platform. Some repositories are already making use of the new platform, in fact. In the fourth quarter of 2025, 4 repositories, the Journal of Economic History data repository, the Panel Study of Income Dynamics data repository, the Social Media Archive, and self-published studies within the National Neighborhood Data Archive, or NANDA, have all already gone live on the new platform. In the second quarter of 2026, we will continue to work on migrating repositories that contain self-published studies, or in some cases, a mix of self-published and curated data, like the American Education Research Association data repository and the Institute for Firearm Injury Prevention data repository. We will also begin work on migrating some publicly available curated studies using studies within NANDA as our first phase. In the third quarter of 2026, we'll move on to our other self-publishing repositories, including OpenICPSR, Data Lumos, and the American Economic Association data repository. And then we'll begin work on our curated studies in quarter 4. Initially, we'll focus only on publicly available studies. The order of migration will be determined by how our new technology is being developed. As new features become available, archives that use those features will migrate so that users see more consistent metadata and improved discovery experience. There are special needs around migrating studies with access restrictions, so we expect to begin work on migrating those studies in 2027. All right, the first enhancement I want to talk about is improved metadata consistency across studies. As you may know, we have 2 ways of sharing data at ICPSR. You can either share data with ICPSR staff, who will curate it, or you can self-publish your data with no curation. We used to have 2 different sets of metadata for self-published and curated studies. They were somewhat alike, but not entirely. On the screen, I'm showing screenshots of an ICPSR curated study on the left and a self-published study on the right. The 2 studies not only have a different order of fields and a different look and feel, they actually have slight differences in which metadata fields are available to describe them. As an example, see the original distribution URL field in the study on the right, which doesn't show up in the study on the left. In the new environment, all studies, curated and self-published, share the same layout and have the same metadata fields. On the screen, I'm sharing an example of a study that's been migrated to the new environment. It has a different layout from the ones we looked at on the last screen. It happens to be self-published, but the same metadata fields are present as would be there if it were a curated study. So all of the improvements that we're talking about today apply whether you or your colleagues share data with ICPSR for curation or whether you publish your own studies. The next thing I want to talk about is ICPSR's expansion of support for persistent identifiers, or PIDs. PIDs are unique, long-lasting references to digital objects. One common example is digital object identifiers, or DOIs, which are online identifiers for works like journal articles, preprints, and datasets. ICPSR already assigns a DOI to each of our studies. PIDs have a number of benefits. They can help uniquely identify people and organizations that are involved in research. So, for example, imagine a researcher with a very common name like John M. Smith. A PID can help ensure that this researcher's works are associated with him so that the data that he deposits in ICPSR is associated with John M. Smith, the economist, not John M. Smith, the computer scientist. PIDs also help solve the problem of variation in names. So, for example, making it clear that two different spellings of an organization name, like University of California, comma, Los Angeles, and University of California dash Los Angeles, refer to the same organization. And then finally, PIDs support interoperability across platforms. They can save researchers time by limiting the work they have to do to keep track of their works in multiple places, like on their CV and the systems they use to apply for grants. ICPSR is implementing primarily two new types of PIDs. One is Open Researcher and Contributor IDs, or ORCIDs, which identify individuals involved in research. So ICPSR is adding integration with ORCID to the principal investigator field in our studies. The other new type of PID that we're implementing is Research Organization Registry, or ROR IDs, which identify organizations. ICPSR is making it possible to use ROR IDs to represent investigator affiliations, principal investigators when they're organizations, and funding agencies. On a related note, ICPSR is also adding support for a third type of identifier, so grant identifiers. While PIDs for grants are less widely adopted than PIDs for people and organizations, interest in PIDs for grant funding is growing. ICPSR has added support for including grant numbers and uniform resource identifiers to cite data funding sources. In the new RDE platform, we're making it possible to search for and add ORCIDs and RORs for every PI on a study. Here's a little demo of me adding a PI to a study using their ORCID in the new deposit environment. So in the Principal Investigators field, I click on Add PI Information. PI as a person is already selected. And in the Search for a Person field, I'm typing in the PI name, finding the ORCID of the PI I want to enter. It automatically populates their given name, family name, email and address, and affiliation. And when I save my work, I can see the PI's ORCID and ROR information in the deposit. We are also retrofitting studies with as many ORCID and ROR IDs as possible as we migrate those studies to the new platform. With ROR, this is a pretty straightforward task. The vast majority of organizations represented in ICPSR metadata, either PI affiliations or funding agencies, already have a ROR, and pretty good tools exist for finding and matching them. Coverage will never be 100% because some organizations involved with ICPSR data aren't eligible for ROR, but for the studies we've migrated to date, we have RORs for about 97% of PI affiliations and 91% of funding agencies. Our coverage of orchids is less consistent. Orchids are up to the researcher to create and maintain. So if a researcher has never created one, no one else can create one on their behalf. Even where orchids do exist, it's harder to search and match them. But ICPSR has had a space on our deposit form for orchids for several years now, and we've been able to make use of orchids that have been provided in that way. And where we can, we've been searching for and adding others as well. So about 81% of the PIs in our studies are associated with orchids. ICPSR's expansion of support for PIDs is laying the foundation for us to make our data and metadata more interoperable in the future. To date, we focused mostly on the two improvements we've talked about today, making it possible to add PIDs to new studies in the future and then populating PIDs in as many of our existing studies as possible. There's a lot more we can do going forward to build off this foundation. So, for example, there are opportunities to improve our search, for example, to make better use of PIDs. So, for example, to recognize that the PI on two studies with the same orchid is the same person, even if their name appears differently across the two studies. There are also opportunities to use PIDs so that researchers who contribute to ICPSR datasets can auto-populate their data to their ORCID records. And that makes it easier for them to get credit for their research contributions and improves the record of their research activities. We consider both of those things to be integral to our future support for PIDs. So watch for improvements in the future. Another enhancement you can expect to see is that we are introducing a new set of required fields for all studies. Folks who share data with ICPSR in our new platform are going to find that we're requiring a few more details about the data being shared with us than they did in the past. So in the past, all that was required to deposit data with ICPSR, the only metadata you had to provide was a title, so just a little short description of what the data are about, a summary, so like a longer narrative description of what the data are about, and a principal investigator. Who was it that collected the data? Now a few more fields are required and not optional in the deposit form. Those are time period when the data pertain to, geographic coverage, or where the data apply to, the city, the state, the country, the region, and then subject terms for a succinct and interoperable way of communicating what the data are about using controlled vocabulary terms. This change will affect everyone who deposits data with us, both data for curation and self-published studies. These fields are no longer optional in the ICPSR deposit form. Each of these new fields helps make data more discoverable in ways that users care about and look for. Users often want data from a particular place or time. Calling out where and when data are from helps users surface data that's about times and places and topics of interest. It helps them filter for just the data they're looking for, like you see me doing in this screenshot. I've filtered for data that's just about economic history, that's the subject term, and just from the United Kingdom. All right, one more metadata enhancement that's coming to ICPSR studies is expanded use of controlled vocabularies. Definitions first. A controlled vocabulary is a limited, organized list of words or phrases used to describe information resources. So studies are ICPSR's data. Some examples of controlled vocabularies that you might be familiar with are the Library of Congress subject headings used in many library catalogs, International Classification of Disease or ICD codes for identifying diseases in healthcare and clinical research, or in a little different example, the list of musical or movie genres found in your favorite streaming platform. Within ICPSR's data holdings, controlled vocabularies make it easier to search and browse across studies. They bring together studies based on things like topic or methodology, and in many cases, they allow ICPSR to make use of controlled vocabularies that are widely used by other repositories for describing social science research data. For example, several that are maintained by the Data Documentation Initiative Alliance. We're implementing several new controlled vocabularies within ICPSR's new platform. They either replace fields that used to be free text or ICPSR specific controlled vocabularies. Some of these new vocabularies are used to describe the subject or the topic of the study. Medical subject headings, or MESH, are available for studies that relate to health. And Journal of Economic Literature classification codes can be used for studies in the field of economics. In addition, we mentioned earlier that the ICPSR subject terms field is now required for all deposits. Not only is the field required, but you have to select a term from the ICPSR subject thesaurus. Options display as you type words and phrases into the subject terms field. We've also added several controlled vocabularies that relate to the study's methodology. There are controlled vocabularies to describe the study's time method. So for example, to identify longitudinal or time series data. There's sampling procedures, as an example, to note studies that use a probability or a complete sample. The unit of analysis. So for example, does the study investigate individuals or households or in a different type of data, geographic areas? The collection mode. So for example, is it collected by interview from physical measurements like height? And then a controlled vocabulary for studies that contain geographic information. The controlled vocabulary captures the smallest geographic unit that's represented in the data, like census tract or county. Finally, we've added two new controlled vocabularies focused on data sources and formats. The data source types controlled vocabulary identifies what the data are derived from, like medical records or biological samples. And the general data format helps users locate specific formats of data like text or geospatial. As studies move to the new platform, we're populating some, although not all, of these new controlled vocabulary fields based on information found in other metadata fields. Some are being mapped from existing fields to an equivalent in the new controlled vocabulary. This is happening in situations where ICPSR used to maintain our own controlled vocabulary for the concept, and we're mapping to a new standardized controlled vocabulary. Examples of these would be collection modes, time methods, general data formats, and data source types. Some of the controlled vocabularies are being reviewed by an ICPSR team member during migration and then retrofitted with values from the new controlled vocabularies where possible. So for example, existing ICPSR studies have free text fields for geographic unit and unit of observation, and those are being used to update the smallest geographic unit and analysis units fields respectively. Also, staff members are reviewing free text values found in the subject terms field, and where an equivalent term exists, updating them to use an authorized ICPSR subject term. But for user-provided subject terms that don't have an equivalent term in the controlled vocabulary, those are being retained, and other is being added at the beginning. The other controlled vocabulary fields are not being retrofitted and will be available in new studies going forward. Okay, I have one final announcement or one final enhancement that I'd like to talk about today, and that is changes to how geographic coverage is handled in studies and the ability to flag studies that are nationally representative. Previously, Geographic coverage in ICPSR studies was based on yet another ICPSR specific controlled vocabulary, which had a few limitations. It was labor intensive to maintain, and it wasn't comprehensive. In the ICPSR thesaurus, places were just represented as a string of text. This screenshot from a study on ICPSR's current platform kind of gets at what the issue with that is. The study's about 4 cities, one of which is Detroit. The geographic coverage metadata field contains 3 separate strings of text: Detroit, Michigan, and United States. From an end user's perspective, those places are related to one another, right? Detroit is part of Michigan, which is part of the United States. But when places are just strings, that relationship is lost. A user cannot look at this and see Detroit is part of Michigan, is part of the United States. They couldn't narrow that search down from the United States to Michigan to Detroit. Migrated studies, on the other hand, will use identifiers from the standardized geonames.org database of places. Geographies from geonames don't just represent place names as text. They contain information about each place's geographic hierarchy, like, as you see in this screenshot, that Texas is part of the United States. This means that each place within a study's geographic coverage is tagged by the type of place it is, like a city, state, country. This makes geographic coverage more precise. We can tell the difference between Georgia, the state, and Georgia, the country, for example. GeoNames is also more comprehensive, doesn't need to be locally maintained. And this enhancement lays the groundwork for ICPSR to do more with geographic coverage potentially in the future, like display studies on a map, for example. A particular form of geographic coverage that is of widespread significance in social science research is the concept of a nationally representative study. If a study is nationally representative, that means not only does it apply to a particular geographic area, right? Not only did it take place in that area, but its sample was specifically designed to accurately represent the demographics and characteristics of the entire nation. Using a nationally representative sample in social science research increases the confidence that the conclusions drawn from that research apply not just to the particular group of people who were being studied, right? The people who literally were part of the survey, but to the whole population that those people are meant to represent. Many studies held at ICPSR have nationally representative samples, but that information is usually found somewhere in a free text field like the study summary or in documentation files. That makes it difficult to surface these studies in a consistent way. You can search for nationally representative, but you can't use a search filter to focus your search specifically on nationally representative studies. The new nationally representative study field is being introduced to help with that. This is a simple yes or no field that clearly designates studies as nationally representative. Users looking for nationally representative data will be able to filter for it directly without guessing from documentation. While there isn't any filtering in place for this field yet in any of the repositories that have migrated so far, just having the field available to begin with lays the groundwork for better searching and filtering in the future. Okay, I promised at the beginning of this talk that I'd conclude with some takeaways for making the most of ICPSR's enhanced metadata. So let's discuss those now. Okay, the first and foremost thing you can do to prepare for these metadata enhancements is, if I may lean into a flower metaphor, to grow your orchid. If you deposit data with ICPSR and you don't already have an orchid, we encourage you to get one before you make your next deposit. Anyone can create an ORCID for themselves. It's completely free. You can control who has access to the data. And depending on your funding situation, you might need to get one anyway. As of January 25th, an ORCID is required in all applications and reports to the U.S. National Institutes of Health. Okay, once you have planted your ORCID, it may need some watering and weeding. Good advice for researchers looking to make the best use of their orchids can be found at info.orchid.org/researchers. Especially helpful for ICPSR's purposes is to make sure your affiliations are up to date on your ORCID record, and where possible that they include a ROR. In the long run, it will also benefit you to allow trusted organizations like DataCite to automatically update your ORCID when new works are published, as that is what would allow ICPSR to make the connection from a deposit with an ORCID in our data holdings to going back and updating the researcher's ORCID record based on that. Okay, and then finally, once your ORCID is set up, start adding it to new deposits that you share with ICPSR. You can do that even now, even before migrating, and that information will show up in your study once it's been migrated. One thing to keep in mind, while I have phrased this advice to our data depositors, this doesn't just apply to them. If you deposit data on behalf of someone else, like a co-investigator, encourage them to get an ORCID and make sure you know what that ORCID is. The same goes for anyone who supports users who deposit with ICPSR. They may need encouragement to grow and use their ORCID as well. This is one more reason beyond the many good reasons that already exist to have an ORCID, that having one is good practice. Another recommendation is to be prepared for those new required fields we talked about: geographic coverage, time period, and ICPSR subject terms. This is not so much an immediate action item, but more something to be prepared for and not surprised about as you deposit. So as you deposit data with ICPSR, be ready to describe where and when the data pertain to, and to find some subject terms that are related to that data. Of the three, finding subject terms might be the most time-consuming task. So a tip I'd like to share is that ICPSR's Turbo Curator product, which is an artificial intelligence-driven tool for completing a few study metadata fields, Turbo Curator does a pretty good job of suggesting subject terms. Turbo Curator is available, though fully optional, within the new deposit platform. So if you would prefer not to spend time trying to figure out ICPSR's preferred term for the concepts in your study, you can provide a brief description to Turbo Curator like I'm showing on the screen here, and get some suggested subject terms back. All right, lastly, one other thing you can do to be ready for these changes is to explore ICPSR's metadata enhancements live on your own in these repositories that have already migrated. The Journal of Economic History data repository at icpsr.umich.edu/sites/JEH. The Panel Study of Income Dynamics repository at icpsr.umich.edu/sites/PSID, and the National Neighborhood Data Archive at icpsr.umich.edu/sites/NANDA. In particular, here are a few studies that really make use of the metadata enhancements and show off what's coming. So search for each of these by title on the repository website to get a look. From the JEH website, Reform, Rails, and Rice, Political Railroads and Local Development in Thailand. from the PSID website, PSID data extracts for the effect of child support on father's labor supply, and from the NANDO website, grocery and food stores by census tract and zip code tabulation area. Okay, if you have questions or you need advice when you're preparing to deposit data with ICPSR, please contact us. Contact us early, contact us often. We are happy to help. You can find help and FAQs on our website at icpsr.umich.edu. You can email our user support team at icpsr-help@umich.edu, or you can reach us by phone at 734-647-2200. Thank you so much for watching.